Chapter 3. Anti-Greed. "What am I doing here?" asked Dr. Robert Stadler. "Why was I asked to come here? I demand an explanation. I'm not accustomed to being dragged halfway across a continent without rhyme, reason, or notice." Dr. Floyd Ferris smiled. "Which makes me appreciate it all the more that you did come, Dr. Stadler." It was impossible to tell whether his voice had a tone of gratitude or of gloating. The sun was beating down upon them, and Dr. Stadler felt a streak of perspiration oozing along his temple. He could not hold an angrily, embarrassingly private discussion in the middle of a crowd streaming to fill the benches of the grandstand around them. The discussion which he had tried and failed to obtain for the last 3 days. It occurred to him that this was precisely the reason why his meeting with Dr. Ferris had been delayed to this moment. But he brushed the thought aside, just as he brushed some insect buzzing to reach his wet temple. "Why was I unable to get in touch with you?" he asked. The fraudulent weapon of sarcasm now seemed to sound less effective than ever, but it was Dr. Stadler's only weapon. "Why did you find it necessary to send me messages on official stationery worded in a style proper, I'm sure, for army—" orders he was about to say, but didn't. "Communications, but certainly not for scientific correspondence." "It is a government matter," said Dr. Ferris gently. "Do you realize that I was much too busy, and that this meant an interruption of my work?" "Oh, yes," said Dr. Ferris noncommittally. "Do you realize that I could have refused to come?" "But you didn't," said Dr. Ferris softly. "Why was I given no explanation? Why didn't you come for me in person instead of sending those incredible young hooligans with their mysterious gibberish that sounded half science, half pulp magazine?" "I was too busy," said Dr. Ferris blandly. "Then would you mind telling me what you're doing in the middle of a plain in Iowa, and what I'm doing here for that matter?" He waved contemptuously at the dusty horizon of an empty prairie, and at the 3 wooden grandstands. The stands were newly erected, and the wood, too, seemed to perspire. He could see drops of resin sparkling in the sun. "We are about to witness an historical event, Dr. Stadler, an occasion which will become a milestone on the road of science, civilization, social welfare, and political adaptability." Dr. Ferris's voice had the tone of a public relations man's memorized handout. "The turning point of a new era." "What event? What new era?" "As you will observe, only the most distinguished citizens, the cream of our intellectual elite, have been chosen for the special privilege of witnessing this occasion. We could not omit your name, could we? And we feel certain, of course, that we can count on your loyalty and cooperation." He could not catch Dr. Ferris's eyes. The grandstands were rapidly filling with people, and Dr. Ferris kept interrupting himself constantly to wave to nondescript newcomers, whom Dr. Stadler had never seen before, but who were personages, as he could tell by the particular shade of gaily informal deference in Ferris's waving. They all seemed to know Dr. Ferris and to seek him out, as if he were the master of ceremonies, or the star of the occasion. "If you would kindly be specific for a moment," said Dr. Stadler, "and tell me what—" "Hi, Spud," called Dr. Ferris, waving to a portly, white-haired man who filled the full-dress uniform of a general. Dr. Stadler raised his voice. "I said, if you would kindly concentrate long enough to explain to me what in hell is going on." "But it's very simple. It's the final triumph of—" "You'll have to excuse me a minute, Dr. Stadler," said Dr. Ferris hastily, tearing forward like an overtrained lackey at the sound of a bell, in the direction of what looked like a group of aging rowdies. He turned back long enough to add 2 words which he seemed reverently to consider as a full explanation. "The press." Dr. Stadler sat down on the wooden bench, feeling unaccountably reluctant to brush against anything around him. The 3 grandstands were spaced at intervals in a semi-curve, like the tiers of a small private circus, with room for some 300 people. They seemed built for the viewing of some spectacle, but they faced the emptiness of a flat prairie stretching off to the horizon, with nothing in sight but the dark blotch of a farmhouse miles away. There were radio microphones in front of one stand, which seemed reserved for the press. There was a contraption resembling a portable switchboard in front of the stand reserved for officials. A few levers of polished metal sparkled in the sun on the face of the switchboard. In an improvised parking lot behind the stands, the glitter of luxurious new cars seemed a brightly reassuring sight. But it was the building that stood on a knoll some 1,000 feet away that gave Dr. Stadler a vague sense of uneasiness. It was a small, squat structure of unknown purpose, with massive stone walls, no windows except a few slits protected by stout iron bars, and a large dome, grotesquely too heavy for the rest, that seemed to press the structure down into the soil. A few outlets protruded from the base of the dome, in loose, irregular shapes resembling badly poured clay funnels. They did not seem to belong to an industrial age or to any known usage. The building had an air of silent malevolence, like a puffed, venomous mushroom. It was obviously modern, but its sloppy, rounded, ineptly unspecific lines made it look like a primitive structure unearthed in the heart of the jungle, devoted to some secret rites of savagery. Dr. Stadler sighed with irritation. He was tired of secrets. Confidential and top confidential had been the word stamped on the invitation, which had demanded that he travel to Iowa on a 2-day notice, and for an unspecified purpose. 2 young men who called themselves physicists had appeared at the Institute to escort him. His calls to Ferris's office in Washington had remained unanswered. The young men had talked, through an exhausting trip by government plane, then a clammy ride in a government car, about science, emergencies, social equilibriums, and the need of secrecy, till he knew less than he had known at the start. He noticed only that 2 words kept recurring in their jabber, which had also appeared in the text of the invitation. 2 words that had an ominous sound when involving an unknown issue. The demands for his loyalty and cooperation. The young men had deposited him on a bench in the front row of the grandstand, and had vanished like the folding gear of a mechanism, leaving him to the sudden presence of Dr. Ferris in person. Now, watching the scene around him, watching Dr. Ferris's vague, excited, loosely casual gestures in the midst of a group of newsmen, he had an impression of bewildering confusion, of senseless, chaotic inefficiency, and of a smooth machine, working to produce the exact degree of that impression needed at the exact moment. He felt a single, sudden flash of panic, in which, as in a flash of lightning, he permitted himself to know that he felt a desperate desire to escape, but he slammed his mind shut against it. He knew that the darkest secret of the occasion, more crucial, more untouchable, more deadly than whatever was hidden in the mushroom building, was that which had made him agree to come. He would never have to learn his own motive, he thought. He thought it, not by means of words, but by means of the brief, vicious spasm of an emotion that resembled irritation and felt like acid. The words that stood in his mind, as they had stood when he had agreed to come, were like a voodoo formula which one recites when it is needed, and beyond which one must not look. What can you do when you have to deal with people? He noticed that the stand reserved for those whom Ferris had called the intellectual elite was larger than the stand prepared for government officials. He caught himself feeling a swift little sneak of pleasure at the thought that he had been placed in the front row. He turned to glance at the tiers behind him. The sensation he experienced was like a small gray shock. That random, faded, shop-worn assembly was not his conception of an intellectual elite. He saw defensively belligerent men and tastelessly dressed women. He saw mean, rancorous, suspicious faces that bore the one mark incompatible with the standard bearer of the intellect, the mark of uncertainty. He could find no face he knew, no face to recognize as famous, and none likely ever to achieve such recognition. He wondered by what standard these people had been selected. Then he noticed a gangling figure in the second row, the figure of an elderly man with a long, slack face that seemed faintly familiar to him, though he could recall nothing about it except a vague memory, as of a photograph seen in some unsavory publication. He leaned toward a woman and asked, pointing, "Could you tell me the name of that gentleman?" The woman answered in a whisper of awed respect, "That is Dr. Simon Pritchett." Dr. Stadler turned away, wishing no one would see him, wishing no one would ever learn that he had been a member of that group. He raised his eyes and saw that Ferris was leading the whole press gang toward him. He saw Ferris sweeping his arm at him in the manner of a tourist guide, and declaring when they were close enough to be heard, "But why should you waste your time on me, when there is the source of today's achievement, the man who made it all possible, Dr. Robert Stadler?"